Hello, my name is Jean, and ordinarily I would be at my toy store in Arvada. And since we're all trying to stay home to prevent the spread of germs, I'm at my own home. And your principal asked me if I'd be interested in reading to you, and I said I would love that. So I have chosen a chapter book, which is part of the I Survived series, and this one is the I Survived the Attack of the Grizzlies in 1967. And it is by an author named Tarshis, and it's part of a series, maybe you've read some of them, called the I Survived. And they're mostly, I think all maybe, are historical fiction. So that means these books are all set in a story, in a time that really happened, but they're all not true stories. But you need to remember it's called I Survived, because at times this story gets a little scary. This particular book is about a grizzly bear. Now, there are no grizzlies in Colorado, but there are grizzlies in Yellowstone and up in Montana, which is a big state that you may recall borders on Canada. It's part of the Rocky Mountain system. And years ago, there probably were grizzlies in Colorado, but we don't think there are any left. And a grizzly can be distinguished from a regular brown bear because it has a big hump on its back between its shoulders. I'm going to try to show you a picture. Do you see that? See that hump there? That's the main difference between a grizzly and a regular brown or black bear. So this book is set back in 1967. So that's quite a few years ago. I was just a little girl at the time. And this was when everybody had been visiting Yellowstone and glacier parks, and they were camping and feeding the bears and trying to, actually literally feeding them from their cars. And the bears would come at night into their campsites and get into their trash cans. And in 1967, there were quite a few encounters between the bears and humans. And so they changed the laws at that time because they wanted everyone to be safe. They wanted the humans to be safe, and they wanted the bears to be safe. But in that year, 1967, there were several incidents that precipitated this to happen. And so this is a historical fiction written set in 1967. So I'm going to read 2 chapters a night to you, or a day to you, and then you can listen to them at your leisure. So if you want to grab some pillows or a blanket and curl up for a few minutes, we can read together. So chapter 1 is on a Tuesday in Granite Park Glacier National Park in Montana. It's happening at 9:30 p.m. Grrr! The enormous grizzly roared with rage. Its dripping jaws were wide open. Its dagger jaws gleamed. And Melody Vega was running for her life. She had no doubt that this bear wanted to kill her. Just moments before, Mel had been sitting in perfect darkness, surrounded by the magical wilderness of Glacier National Park. The owls hooted, night bugs shimmered. But then there were new sounds, sounds that made Melanie's blood turn to ice. Massive paws crunched across the ground, wet, wheezing breath, low, thundering growls. Mel looked into the distance, and there it was, the grizzly. Its silver-brown fur glittered in the moonlight. Mel's body filled with panic, and before she could stop herself, she was running as fast as she could. Within seconds, the bear was after her, its paws crushing against the ground. Mel's heart pounded with terror as she sprinted toward a pine tree. It was small and thin, but it was her only hope for staying alive. She prayed that this grizzly didn't climb trees. The bear was just one leap away when Mel launched herself into the tree. She gripped a low branch, kicking her legs up and swinging them around. But before she could start climbing, the bear was standing on its hind legs. It swiped at Mel with its giant paw, and the claw tore through the flesh of her leg. Somehow Mel ignored the searing pain and the dripping blood. She clutched the branch with her trembling hands and pulled herself higher and higher out of the bear's stabbing reach. But the grizzly didn't give up. It pounded the tree trunk, it ripped away branches, and bellowed with fury. Grrr! The spindly tree shook as though it was terrified as Mel, and then, crack! The branch in Mel's hand broke off. She tipped back. Time seemed to slow as she tumbled through the air, twisting and turning and screaming for help. Down, down, down she fell. Mel braced herself for the crushing jaws and ripped claws. No grizzly had ever killed a human in Glacier National Park until tonight. End of chapter 1. Chapter 2 actually is 2 days earlier. It's Sunday, the Sunday before, and we're at Lake McDonald Glacier National Park at 8 p.m. Mel, I have a question for you, said Mel's 4-year-old brother, Kevin. Go ahead, Mel said. They were on the beach outside their grandfather's log cabin. Kevin was perched on Mel's lap, gobbling a roasted marshmallow. Their campfire cracked. The lake looked purple in the moonlight. What's the most dangerous, scariest, most fierce animal? Kevin asked. Here in Glacier? Mel asked. She swallowed the last bit of her own roasted marshmallow. Kevin nodded. A grizzly bear, she said, but only if you surprise them. Everyone knew that. What animal can beat a grizzly? He asked. Said Mel. She loved her little brother more than anything, but he could drive her crazy with his nonstop questions. What about a mountain lion? Kevin asked. I doubt it, Mel said. She stared into the campfire. A wolf? Probably not. A coyote? I don't think so. I know, said 4-year-old Kevin with excitement. A wolverine. Those were ferocious animals that looked like little bears, but were really a kind of weasel. Mel had no idea if wolverines picked fights with grizzlies. Luckily, their grandfather was just walking down from the cabin. His work boots crunched on the rocky sand. Did someone say Wolverine? He asked as he sat down next to them. I once saw a wolverine steal a dead deer from 3 wolves. The wolverine was no bigger than a fox, but it had no fear at all. Kevin jumped up on Mel's lap. Can a wolverine beat a grizzly? No, Pop said, shaking his hands. Grizzlies are the strongest, but I'll tell you this, wolverines are fierce. Like me, said Kevin with a little growl. He bared his teeth and turned his sticky hands into claws. Then he fell into Pop's lap in a fit of giggles. The sound rose up into the starry night, and at that moment, Mel could pretend that this was just another normal, happy vacation in Glacier. But of course, there was nothing normal about this trip. And Mel was sure she'd never feel happy again. Dad was back in Wisconsin. He couldn't miss any more work this year. And Mom was gone. She died last December in a car crash. Mel felt a stabbing pain in her chest, like her heart was cracking apart all over again. She stood up, fighting tears. Be right back, she told Pops and Kevin as she headed to the cabin. She didn't like anyone to see her cry. Mel hadn't wanted to come to Glacier this year, but Pops had said they had to keep up their tradition. They always came to Glacier for 2 weeks in the summer. Mom would want them to be here, Pops said. Dad agreed. You love Glacier, Mel, he had reminded her. I think it's going to make you feel better. By better, Dad meant Mel would want to do something other than sit alone in her room. That she'd want to see her friends, play softball, go bowling, anything. But Mel didn't want to feel better. She didn't deserve to feel better, since it was her fault her mom was gone. Mel pulled open the door to the cabin as her mind flashed back to that snowy December night. Her friend Teresa had wanted her to sleep over. Mom said no because the roads were too icy for driving. Mel begged and pleaded, and finally, when the snow had stopped, Mom had agreed to take her. They pulled out of the driveway. The skies had cleared and the snow seemed to glow. Mom had started to sing, Row, row, row your boat. And Mel started singing along. It was one of their funny traditions from when Mel was a little girl. Whenever they were alone in the car, they'd sing together. The dumber the song, the better. They were still singing when Mom rounded the curve. The car hit a sheet of black ice. They spun around and around and around and skidded off the road. The driver's side of the car smashed right into a tree. It was all over in seconds. Mel sat down in a kitchen chair. Dad was wrong. Being in Glacier made her heart hurt even more because everything here reminded her of Mom. Every sparkle in Lake McDonald, every breath of the sweet air, the song of every bird that sang from the pine trees. This had always been Mom's favorite place, and Mel's too. This cabin had been in their family for more than 60 years. Pops and his dad built the cabin back before Glacier was a famous national park packed with people. Mel looked around. The cabin hadn't changed much since then. It was still just 4 small rooms and a porch. It had no electricity, no running water. They slept on cots, read by lantern, and collected rainwater in a big barrel. The toilet was in back. It was an outhouse. But as Mom used to say, who needs a fancy house when your backyard has 1 million acres of Rocky Mountain wilderness? Look in any direction in Glacier Park and you'll see something that makes your eyes pop wide open. A turquoise lake, a waterfall tumbling down a cliff, ice-covered mountains soaring into the sky. Mel wished she was home, back home in Wisconsin, where she could close her door, turn out the lights, and try to forget. Mel, Kevin bellowed, Pops is going to tell another story. Come on. Mel took a deep breath and headed back outside. She didn't want to upset Kevin. Okay, Pop said, I have a story about an animal way more frightening than a Wolverine. To me, anyway, because one of these nasty critters attacked me one night. Kevin's eyes grew wide. He had climbed back onto Mel's laps. Tell us, Pops, tell us. Oh, I don't know, Pops said, pretending to change his mind. I don't want to scare you. I'm brave, Pops. I'm very, very brave, Kevin exclaimed. Mel cracked a smile and held Kevin a little tighter. What would she do without her loud, bossy, pesty little brother? All right, Pop says, but don't say I didn't warn you. So that was the end of chapter 2. Now I have a quick question for you. The story's happening in 1967, and the cabin is 60 years old. So can you figure out what year the cabin was born or built? That's a little math problem for you. Again, it's 1967, and the cabin was 60 years old. Take care. See you next time. Bye.